A very good evening to all of you. This is a great platform for us all to hear and share stories. I really loved every one of the stories I listened to today, as always. And I'm glad that once in a way I'm able to give back to it, to this platform in any way. I'm from Bangalore, India. Of course, a storyteller, a writer, and in general, I like anything that has anything to do with stories. The story I wanted to share with you today is from one of the greatest Indian epics, Mahabharata. Mahabharata, in its simplest form, is often called Jaya or victory. Well, it is the story of victory, not only of good over evil. It's a story of victory of egos. It's a story of victory of desires. It is a story in which every character is just brought out to face the world in their rawest form without any layer, any kind of um, filter on them. In a simplest form, if you want to say, it's often told to be the story of the fight between two brothers, two sets of brothers, rather cousins, over who would be the king. But that is really not the story because Mahabharata is a river. And just like any river, it flows over several generations. And just like any river, what each generation gets depends on what started long ago. Maybe it's a landslide, maybe it's an avalanche, maybe it's a fertile land. It all begins a long, long time ago. And so today, the story I'm going to share with you is by no means representative of the epic. I do hope it will sort of whet your appetite to know more about this story. And I am going to start this story right at the bottom. The great king Janamejaya, the great grandson of Arjuna, sat presiding over the yagna or the fire sacrifice. A host of learned men stood around the fire, chanting incantations, chanting mantras for something to happen. But unlike many of the other yagnas, like the Ashwamedha yagna, where a fire sacrifice was a way of offering to the god to get something good, to bring plenty, to bring prosperity, this yagna was not for that. Janamejaya, the great king, was presiding over a yagna called the Sarpa Satra, or the sacrifice of the snakes. The set of learned men around the fire in blank were chanting the incantations, each naming a snake. And that snake, the Naga as they are called, whichever part of the earth they were, came coiling, hissing, and fell into the fire, and the fire leapt up all the more. Janamejaya, the king, looked at this without flinching, without batting an eyelid, for he was filled with revenge. He wanted to avenge the death of his father, who was bitten by a snake. His father, whom he had never got to see, whom he had seen when he was very young, he didn't remember. So, when he came to know that it was the king of snakes, Takshaka, who had killed his father, he decided that day that he would eliminate all the snakes, Nagas of the world. The incantations were so powerful. Almost all the snakes, they say, from any corner of the earth had perished, except a few. And one among them was Takshaka, his father's nemesis and the king of snakes. Now, why was this snake safe? Well, Takshaka, the king of snakes, was a close friend of Indra, who was the king of gods. Naturally, the king of gods could do anything. So Indra coiled Takshaka to the chair of his throne and did not let him go. The learned men around Janamejaya came up to him and said, "O king, almost all the snakes have perished, but Takshaka, I don't think so. He is being protected by Indra. There is no way we can get him." Janamejaya looked at them straight in the face and said, "If it means that we have to kill Indra, the king of the gods, and he has to jump into the fire, so be it." Uttered their incantation to drag Takshaka along with Indra and the throne. What they did. When Indra, the king of the gods, felt his chair shaking, he let go of Takshaka. Takshaka started coiling down into the hissing fire. Just an inch above the tip of the hungry fire, when a young boy, one among all the learned men there, put out his hand and said, "Stop!" Stopped right there in midair. Janamejaya was angry. He looked at the boy. "What are you trying to do? I will." "Wait, O king," said the boy. "I bow down to you. I am in awe of this great sacrifice you've arranged. I have heard so much about you, the great king, the great listener, who never fails to listen to any of his subjects. And that's all I am asking you, a listening." The king was pleased. "Who are you?" "Well," said the young boy, "I am Astika. My mother is a Naga, a snake, and she sent me here today to protect my clan." "And why should I protect your clan? Your clan that has been the reason for the death of my father?" He asked. "I am not asking you to stop," said Astika, the young boy. "I am asking you to listen. Listen as to why your father was killed. The reason." Janamejaya looked doubtful, but Vyasa, who is in fact the writer of the Mahabharata, came up and said, "O king, that is true. There is a reason. There is a reason why your father was killed by a snake." "Well then, let me hear," Janamejaya. And so we go down to the knot in the river behind. To Janamajaya's father, Parikshit. Parikshit, the son of Abhimanyu, the son of who was the son of Arjuna. At the end of the Mahabharata war, which was a war where the entire country, the Bharata, was involved. Every one of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, every one of their offspring was killed. All the children were dead, all except one. And that was Parikshit, who was still in his mother's womb and who was shielded from death by Krishna, who put his Sudarshana Chakra, the shield, to shield the child. So Parikshit was born. He did not even know his father because his father was killed in the battle. He was born entitled because he was the single offspring of the entire generation. No one else was alive. So naturally, he was a little arrogant. One day, Parikshit went to the forest to hunt. He was trying to hunt a bear who was literally flying here and there. He could not give up. After all, he was the one who survived the king. So he chased the bear, little knowing that it was a mirage. Well, isn't it so often true? We never know something is an illusion until it's too late. Chasing the bear, he came across the hermitage of a sage called Samika. Now, this sage was deep in meditation. Parikshit was thirsty. Oh, sage, can you give me some water? This is King Parikshit. The sage did not open his eyes. Oh, sage, this is Parikshit, the king. Can you give me some water? He did not open his eyes. Oh, sage, what kind of a human being are you? Huh? I'm asking you for water. Don't you see I'm the king? The sage still did not open his eyes. In anger, Parikshit lifted a dead snake and put it over the sage's neck. Ha! And went away. When the sage's son came and saw this, he was filled with rage. The one who put the snake around my father's neck, that man is going to die because of a snake bite. He cursed. Well, they say a curse can never go wrong. But the sage felt bad. When he opened his eyes because of all this commotion, he sent a messenger to the king, Parikshit, that this is the curse. So Parikshit surrounded himself in a house with several gates and several walls. Every single part of the wall was protected by incantations and enchantments. No one could go in, no one could reach. Every single piece of food that went into his room was protected. But they say destiny has a way of finding it. And so Takshaka, the snake, became a little worm and got into the fruit. And as the fruit was taken into the room for King Parikshit to eat, the snake bit Parikshit and Parikshit died. That is the story of your father, said Vyasa. Well, said Janamejaya, well, I understand that my father had wronged a sage, but what wrong had he done to that snake? I still want my revenge, said Vyasa. That means I have to tell you another story. Another story? Well, I have to bring up one more knot back up the river once more. Another generation. Well, okay, I'm listening, said the king. Way before the Mahabharata war started, when the Pandavas and Kauravas were still brothers and still fighting. The Kauravas, the father of the Kauravas was the king of Hastinapura. The Pandavas had tried to kill the Pandavas. Somehow they escaped and came back with Draupadi, their wife. Now that they were back, they had to be given a land. The king decided to partition the land among the two brothers so that there would be no fight, two sets of brothers. And so the clever, wily king decided to give the Pandavas, the ancestors of Parikshit, a forest land. A forest land that was filled with evil spirits and wild animals and was the home of snakes. No one dared to go near that land. No one. And so Arjuna, one of the Pandavas, went with Krishna, his cousin, to survey the land. How can we even build an empire in this land? They thought, when suddenly they were approached by a man. The man bowed to them and said, I am Agni, the fire god. I need to burn down this forest. I need it really, really badly. If you will help me burn down this forest, I will protect you against everything and make sure that your land, this land becomes your land. Well, said Arjuna, you're fire. Why do you need my help to burn down this forest? Ah, said Agni, that is the problem. You see, this land belongs to Indra, the god of gods. He doesn't allow me to burn this down because Takshaka the snake is here, his close friend. Now you can help me because you are the greatest of all warriors. This seems to be a win-win. We get the land and Agni gets the burn of his forest and we get to build a capital. And that is what they did. Arjuna burned down the entire Khandava forest to ash. As Arjuna burnt it down, every single one of the animals, the trees, the snakes, the birds, everything perished in that fire. And among all the snakes that perished, the only one left was Takshaka. And Takshaka vowed to take revenge on Arjuna and Arjuna's clan at one time or another. You see, O king, said Vyasa, that is the story of revenge. Well, said Janamejaya, that means the real culprit is Agni. Now, Agni, the fire whom I am worshipping, he is the reason for this father's death. Well, no, said Vyasa. Is there another story? A short one. Let us go up the river once more. You see, there was this king called Swaketu who wanted to do sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice all the time. A huge fire sacrifice, pouring ghee into the fire. He's insatiable. He had so many things he wanted to get. He once performed a sacrifice for 12 years. And Agni, the fire, who was the vehicle taking these offerings to the gods, had a stomachache, bad stomachache, and said, I will not be part of any other sacrifice again. I am then done with these humans and their tendency to want more and more and more. I am done. Well, the gods were hungry. The people wanted things. How could it be solved? Well, then Agni came to know that there were some special trees in the Khandava forest which, when burnt, would become a digestive, would make his tummy feel better. And so that is why Agni wanted to destroy the forest. Janamejaya sat back and looked at all the people, at the fire raging, at Takshaka, who was 1 inch above the fire, going to fall into it. To all the people, all the Nagas who had perished in the fire, to all the people around him. He looked down and then looked up again and said, I am sure if I tried to find out one more knot in the river, I will find one. But then, no, I don't want to. I do understand that there will be knots and knots in the river every time. And what you get is coming from the past. But I also understand that what I can make of it, what I can do, I can stop this madness. I can stop this revenge. The buck stops here. And so he pardoned the Nagas and he beseeched the learned ones to help the Nagas regenerate and grow again. And that is the story of the river that flows back or forward, whichever way you choose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Wonderful story.
Thank you.
Barry, what is that gesture? Oh, just for her cloth.
The use of the costume, the use of the scarf as the river. That was lovely.
Thank you.
I liked this very much because there was a story inside the story and there were 3 different stories moving backwards and backwards. So there was a solid reason why this whole thing happened. So what was the king who was bitten by the snake, his name?
Parikshit.
Parikshit. So it all happened with a very valid reason. And even though I've read it long ago, I had forgotten. Thank you for bringing it all back. Very beautifully narrated. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, Meera, it was very beautifully narrated. I think we know very little about Parikshit. So thank you for bringing it out and making us think, and beautifully interwoven story. All the stories, all the 3 stories were beautifully interwoven with each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, actually, Mahabharata has a lot of stories where, if you, for each story, when you ask the question why, there is a reason, and that never stops. So, but life has to go on. So each generation faces the result of what they have done. So that is something I find extremely beautiful in this epic. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you.
Yeah, Eric, one comment. The fact that it's from the epics, but the storyteller has chosen such a modern title. That I think is a fantastic synthesis. And the buck stops here, which is a kind of Americanism, and that has been grafted onto a very, very Indian tale. I think that I compliment her on that synthesis.
Thank you, Sharda.
You're all very good in your storytelling. I mean, really very cleverly narrated, you know. It explains so many things in such a short way. So beautiful it is. I understood karma. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, we come to our final storyteller of the evening for us in India, but for Regina in New Mexico, it's morning. Right? Has the sun come up? It's 7. It's
Oh, it's 8:12 here.
oh,
Our sun is up, and I've been up because I woke up horrifyingly early.
oh my goodness.
So the nap is in my future.
For those who don't know, Regina commutes between New York and New Mexico and many other places, and teaches at NYU and organizes various storytelling theaters and festivals. A very busy person. So we're very grateful that you come and tell us a story now and then.
Well, I love telling you all stories. I think it's great fun. And I say to people, I'm about to do something for India, and they go, "What? Are you flying to India?" Not today, no, but via Zoom, yes. So it's always a delight to do this, and I love hearing the stories. I many years ago saw the production that Peter Brook did of the Mahabharata, and I watched the 3 shows, 9 hours in one day, and it was transformative. Truly so. It was gorgeous, and I can remember doing that. And of course, I only a little bit understood what I was watching, but it didn't matter. It was there. It was so powerful. So I'm always glad to hear little bits and pieces from or around the Mahabharata.
And of course, you were here in Chennai, what, a couple of years ago, a few years ago?
17,
My
not years
gosh.
ago. 2007, 2017, yes. Time flies.
And Barry, who has participated in the Chennai Festival and these sessions for years, now Barry is here in India. He was in Chennai doing workshops this past weekend, and now he's doing a tour of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So we're very lucky to get a in-person visit once in a while from people.
Well,
Okay, so Regina, you might have gathered I don't spotlight storytellers. I leave it in gallery mode, but I do pin your image just for the sake of the recording on my side, but on your side, I suggest if you like, put your image on the bottom of the screen. Can you move images around? Can you move the rectangles around?
I don't really know how.
Just click on someone's image and try to drag it.
Well, I'll click on mine.
Yeah.
No.
Does it move?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so I suggest to storytellers, put your image on the bottom and put the image of somebody who seems like a good listener, put their image at the top, right? Well, you put their image on the top because, in a theater, it's front row center, but in Zoom, it's top row center. And that person can be your special listener. But of course, to give real satisfaction to your viewers in the conference and in the recording, we have to look in the camera, even though it's not fun for us, but it's fun for our viewers. Okay, so you're going to tell a story by Hans Christian Andersen?
I am. This is one of two, as I have read, that two stories of his that the Nazis banned, and they were circulated in the underground. So it's one of the lesser known stories. Diane Walkstein, the storyteller, pointed it out to me, and it's one of two that I tell quite often. I told it last year in Central Park. And it's called The Most Incredible Thing of All. And when we think about, well, what is the most incredible thing of all? Well, maybe it's time. Maybe, as we heard a couple stories ago, or, understanding karma might be a most incredible thing. Here's what Hans Christian Andersen says is the most incredible thing of all. And this story begins like many stories. The one who could do the most incredible thing should have the king's daughter and half the kingdom. The young men and even the old ones, they all strained all their thoughts and sinews and muscles. This is Andersen, so it's his words. They strained their thoughts and sinews and muscles. Two ate themselves to death. One drank until he died. That's what they thought was the most incredible thing. Of course, it wasn't. Street boys thought the most incredible thing was to spit on their own backs. So they practiced spitting on their own backs. It's impossible. But they thought it was the most incredible thing. So people made things or created things or did things, and then there was to be an exhibition in a great hall in the town, an exhibition of the most incredibles. And judges were chosen. They were everything from children 6 years of age up to people in their 60s. The whole town was going to gather. But as the things came into the exhibition hall, people were watching, and it became clear that the most incredible thing was this enormous clock, a huge clock, a beautifully created clock in a wooden case, beautifully designed, marvelously designed, inside and out. I'm going to describe this clock. On the stroke of every hour, living figures came out of it, and they showed what hour it was. There were 12 representations in all, with moving figures, with music, with conversations. Oh, everyone was saying, that's the most incredible thing. Of course, it's going to be chosen. When the clock struck 1, Moses stood on the mountain, and he wrote down on the tablets that he held, he wrote down that first commandment, of course. There is only one God. That's that first commandment. When the clock struck 2, it was Eden. We were in Eden, and Adam and Eve were there, and they were both so happy, both of them happy, even though they didn't have any of the things that we think we need to make us happy. They didn't have anything. They didn't even have a dresser drawer. But of course, Adam and Eve didn't need a dresser drawer. On the stroke of 3, the kings from the east came. They were bearing gifts for the child. They came with gold, frankincense, myrrh, and maybe even some thyme. On the stroke of 4 came the 4 seasons. Spring was there. Spring was a cuckoo on a budding beach bough. I mean, just beautiful budding beach bough. That was spring. Summer was a grasshopper. It was on a stalk of very ripe corn. Autumn was the stork's nest, but the nest was empty. The nest was totally empty. It was autumn. The storks had flown south. Winter was an old crow. Winter was an old crow sitting by the fireplace telling stories, old memories, old stories. That crow. Now, the 5, when the clock struck 5, it was the 5 senses. And the sense of sight was a glasses maker. This sense of hearing was a coppersmith, rat-a-tat-tatting. The sense of smell was somebody selling flowers. Would you like to buy my violets? Said that flower seller. The sense of touch and feeling was an undertaker with a long crepe coat. 6 was a gambler. 6 was a gambler with dice, of course, because what's the highest number in the dice? 6. And those dice always came up. 6. When the clock struck 7, it was the days of the week. Well, it might have been the 7 deadly sins. They're hard to tell apart. They're very tightly together. The 7 days of the week, the 7 deadly sins. 8 was a choir of monks. They were singing the 8 o'clock prayers. Now 9 was the 7 muses. 9, one was a keeper of historical records, and one was an astronomer, and the other were something or other with the theater. No one could tell what, but they were with the theater. The stroke of 10, it was Moses again. Here came Moses again, and he had all 10 commandments on those tablets. When the clock struck 11, it was children. They were singing and they were dancing. 2 and 2 is 7. The clock is struck 11. And 12 was an old watchman. He had a very beautiful fur hat and a halberd. And he sang the watchman's song, which was, "'Twas at the stroke of midnight, our Savior he was born." And when he sang, roses appeared and they changed into angel heads and they were borne aloft on rainbow-colored wings. It was a beautiful clock. It was an amazing clock. There's so many things came in and out of that clock. It was lovely to see, charming to hear, a matchless work of art, and the case was perfect. It was, of course, going to be chosen as the most incredible thing. Oh, and the man who made the clock. He was a young man. He was a good-looking guy. He was good-hearted. He was a true friend. He was very kind to his parents. Well, everyone said he made the most incredible thing and he deserved the princess. And she was kind of pleased at that thought, though she had no say in this matter. Well, the day of decision arrived. And the whole town had a holiday. Everything was closed because everyone was invited to see this great ceremony of honoring whoever made that most incredible thing. And the judges looked around in the room and everyone kind of looked, as everybody knew that young man was going to be chosen. And just before the judges made that decision, announced it, a young man, a skinny guy, kind of bony, long-legged, long-armed, and very long-faced. He stood up and he said, "No, no, no. You think that's the most incredible thing of all. Well, I shall do the most incredible thing." And he had an axe with him, and he took his axe and he smashed the clock. He just smashed the clock to smithereens, and widgets came flying out and springs came flying out, and all the pieces of the clock just were lying in just splinters on the floor. He said, "That I could do he said. My work has overcome his. My work has overcome all of you. I have done the most incredible thing. Well, the judges were horrified. To destroy a work of art like that, that's incredible. And everyone said, oh my God, I've never seen anything as incredible. How could anybody do that to a beautiful work of art? It's the most incredible. Oh dear. That was the most incredible thing. Everyone had said so. And a promise is a promise. A promise is a promise. And so the princess was promised to the man who destroyed the clock. Well, from the ramparts, trumpets blared and announced the wedding, and a few days later in the church, everyone gathered to see the wedding of the princess and this young fellow. She was not pleased, as you might imagine, but she looked charming. She did. She looked charming, and she was gorgeously dressed. The church shone with candles. It was nighttime, and the candles gave a beautiful light in that church. The maidens of the town, they sang, and they led the princess forward, and the knights sang, and they led this bridegroom forward, and he strutted as if he could never be broken. And then the singing stopped, and you could have heard a pin drop. But suddenly, in the midst of the silence, there was a great crashing boom, and the doors of the church flew open. And down the aisle marched the pieces of the clock. They came down the aisle, and as they came down the aisle, in splinters, it started to coalesce and come together. Now, we know that dead men cannot walk again. That's what Anderson says. Dead men cannot walk again, but the spirit of great art can. The spirit of the art, the spirit of us all. The body may be splintered into nothing, but you cannot destroy spirit, said Anderson. And the pieces of the clock, they marched down the aisle, and they stood between the bridegroom and the bride. And they began to tell off the bridegroom. Moses came forward and he said, you, and he took the tablets of the law and he threw them on that bridegroom's feet so he could not run away. And then Adam and Eve came out, and all of the pieces came out, and they said, shame. They said, shame, shame. And they told him nasty things about himself. They told off that bridegroom, shame. He didn't feel any shame. And then out came Moses. He had all 10 commandments that were down on the floor, but there he was again, boom, more on the feet of that bridegroom. And then the watchman came, the watchman, and he with his halberd, he smashed that man. He said, you deserve this. We are avenged, as is our master who made us. And he smashed that man. And when he did, all the pieces of the clock disappeared. We are avenged. We are avenged. And they disappeared. And as they disappeared, all the candles all around the church just sent out luminous light, like bouquets of light throughout the church. And the stars painted on the ceiling, they sent down long luminous beams of light throughout the church. And the organ began to play all by itself. And everyone said, this was the most incredible thing we have ever seen, ever, ever. And then a very soft voice was heard, a hesitant at first voice. Excuse me, it was the princess. Could you please summon the man who made the clock? It is he who should be my husband. I want to marry the man who made the most incredible thing. not destroyed it. And everyone agreed that was as what should happen. And so the young man was brought forward. He was brought forward and the princess married him. And not one person was jealous. Not one person in that whole church was jealous. And that, said Anderson, was the most incredible thing of all. The Nazis didn't like that story.
Why?
Bullies defeated. Why not? I like that story, among other reasons, because the princess finds her voice. And so many stories begin with some king giving away the princess who has no say in it. And I happen to like this one. She finds her voice and says, no, no, thank you. So it's an interesting story.
Well, you told it just absolutely beautifully.
Well, thank you. I like Anderson's humor. He's got this very sly humor, right? The seven deadly sins and the 7 days of the week, for example. No one could tell them apart. I think that's wonderful. The other story that was banned was called The Wicked Prince. And it is deadly straight on. There's no humor in it. And it's about a wicked prince. He doesn't win either. The bully doesn't win. We have to remember that, I think. Ultimately, what was that in the Mahabharata? There's, regenerations and all of that. I mean, a lot of the things happen, cycles.
Vijay Lakshmi?
Yes, I think that was the most fascinating story, Regina. Thank you. The expressiveness, the connect between the each time of the clock was really amazing, really amazing. And it connected me back to when I was in Denmark some time back. And I got this book of Hans Christian Andersen during one of the conferences. One of the stories was about the wicked king in that book. Yes. And I think expressions were amazing. And the story was really very captivating.
Oh,
Really, very captivating. And the connects were very, very amazing, really, of thing. And at the end, the princess taking her decision was really incredible. Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I skipped the 3 wise men. Did I skip the 3 wise men?
Yeah.
I think I said them, and they were bearing gifts. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you did. You did.
Okay. I went, oh God, did I mention them? But it's interesting, and I don't know why, and I don't know if anyone's ever written a PhD thesis on it, but it starts off with the very biblical, but then he gets into a more open space. But the first 3 are Moses, Adam, and Eve, and the wise men, but then we go to the seasons and other things. So that's kind of an interesting thing in terms of how he wrote it.
Well, it's magical realism.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And your telling was just a wonderful example of how, we can tell softly and draw people in. We don't have to go after our listeners. We can just invite them in.
Many years ago, I took a class on auditioning for television. I mean, many years ago. And the only thing I remember from that class was make love to the camera.
People used to say television is a more intimate medium than cinema or the stage, but video conferencing is the most intimate. Because yes, we're all just like a few inches away from each other.
Right. So, anybody else?
Yes, the message is so powerful that brute force is defeated by the creative, the constructive forces. I think that is why the Nazis banned it.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I read, and I love, it also said it was circulated in the underground. So it wasn't just that the Nazis banned these two stories, but according to what I read, we knew, hey, psst, here's a story, right? So let's hear it for good literature, good folk tales, and good mythology, because it holds truth, and it often annoys those who would destroy. Yeah.
I'm just looking up Hans Christian Andersen to see when he lived. He lived from 1805 to 1875. So that was before the Nazis.
Oh,
But
yeah. Well,
mhm.
but there were wicked princes
Huh?
abounding.
You have to give credit to the Nazis that they had some attentive literary readers.
Right. Or, however they figured it out. But
Oh,
I
they figured it out. If people were really dumb, they wouldn't even figure it out.
but I think, and again, one of these days I'll go do the research, but I think the Wicked Prince was written about a specific, some prince who was conquering all the neighbors. And it's a very straight story, but it could describe any number of people doing that right now,
Okay,
So
well, let's not get into USA politics right now.
this was not USA. I was not thinking about USA or India, quite frankly.
Oh, okay.
We're not out conquering our neighbors quite yet, but it's a very and the prince conquers everything, and then he puts his statue up in front of everything, and he wants to put his statue up in front of the altar in the cathedral, and the priest says, "Sir, you are great, but God is greater," and he says, "I'll conquer God." It's very interesting story, and he does not win, but what conquers him is a single flea. I love that. The power of individual action against tyranny.
Mhm.
That's the Wicked Prince, but I think it was written about some, a prince in Europe.
Moira?
Yeah, Regina, I love the story. It was creating a whole surrealistic world, which at the same time was so real. All these images that I could really see it in front of my eyes. And what I love it's sort of also the context, what you said about it being forbidden, so which at the same time shows the power and the danger. Thank God, one must say, of the power of a story. It's sort of mind over matter. The clock is entirely destroyed, and still it all comes back. And I wonder the connection. Sorry, Lakshmi, we can't. We hear you.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Um, that as it also it really annoyed me that the princess was just an object, and you made that very clear, and suddenly she through this process which happens, which is the real extraordinary thing happening, of these figures coming to life again, she becomes from an object to a subject, and she decides. So I think it's wonderful. There are several layers, and yeah, thank you very much. I've never heard of that story before.
It's called The Most Incredible Thing, or The Most Incredible Thing of All.
Mm.
It's in the complete, and it's online. You can find it online, even if you look up in.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe
Okay.
someday they'll make a musical out of it. I mean, I see it, it would be a delightful kind of Broadway show musical because of all of the stuff that's happening.
Mhm.
I could see that if somebody wanted to take it on.
All right, shall we stop the recording so we can say goodbye without recording? Yes.